Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Esri GeoDev webinar series. We started this series as a way to continue engaging in developer-related topics and discussions in between dev summits. Along with our developer summits, we also have our annual user conference coming up July 12th through 15th. This year, we are hosting the event virtually, and we'll have an ArcGIS platform for developers track, so be sure to check it out if you do attend. Moving forward, in continuation of our GeoDev webinar series, we will have new topics, advanced features, and additional functionality to share with you. So be sure to stay connected with us through our GeoDev webinar series page or any of our social media accounts at Esri GeoDev. We would love to have conversations like these taking place throughout the year so that when we do meet at one of these Dev Summit conferences, it will be as though we never stopped. We hope you get as much or more out of this webinar than you anticipated. Now, we would like to introduce you to today's webinar, ArcGIS Notebooks, Python, and Survey123. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. We've taken a screenshot of an example of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop in the upper right corner. You're listening in using your computer speaker system by default. But if you would prefer to join over the phone, just select Use Telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the Questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. I would now like to introduce you to one of our presenters, Zachary Sotheby. Let's get started, shall we, Zach?
Thank you, Amy. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the ArcGIS API for Python Survey123 module presentation. My name is Zach Sotheby. I'm a product engineer on the ArcGIS Survey123 team. Before getting started and diving into Python specifically, I wanted to back up and note that a number of Survey123 workflows can be automated using a variety of tools. Workflows such as sending emails when a survey is submitted, generating reports as surveys roll in, copying data to a spreadsheet or database management system, creating reports in your own custom applications using the Survey123 Report REST API, and using Esri's GeoEnrichment API to enrich data can all be accomplished using Esri-provided or third-party tools that all integrate with Survey123. So for example, in the screen captures that you see on screen, on the bottom left-hand side, you'll see an Integromat webhook that is configured to create a report as a survey is submitted, upload it to a Google Drive, and then send an email to using the Gmail connector. On the bottom right, you'll see a notebook that we'll demo a little bit later on in this presentation using the ArcGIS API for Python to create reports. And then on the top right-hand side of the slide, you'll see a little screen capture of some JavaScript that uses the Survey123 Report REST API that is used in a custom application that will create reports dynamically for you. Now going into the ArcGIS API for Python and specifically the Survey123 module, the Survey123 module in the ArcGIS API for Python provides you methods and resources to automate common tasks with your Survey123 surveys. Using the module, you can work with your surveys, identify properties, and share your survey. Additionally, you can share survey results, whether that be through a pandas data frame, downloading the results as a file geodatabase, or creating reports. The ArcGIS Survey123 module can be used with other modules available in the ArcGIS API for Python to complete workflows. For example, you can connect to a survey and work with the underlying feature service or perform common tasks on large numbers of surveys. Now, what can be done with the Survey123 module? Using the Survey123 module, you can connect to your surveys, which gives you access to the survey properties and underlying dataset. You can download your survey data as a CSV, shapefile, or file geodatabase, as well as create sample report templates and list report templates that are already associated with your survey. You can generate reports or list reports that are stored in the ArcGIS organizational account from your current GIS connection. This shows all reports that are saved in that specific named user's content, and we'll show that a little bit later on in this presentation. I'll now demo a common workflow of cloning surveys from one organization to another, which showcases the Survey123 module and additional modules in the ArcGIS API for Python. So here I have a notebook that will clone surveys from one organization to another. A common question that the Survey123 team hears is, what's the best way to clone my surveys from one organization to another? A few use cases or workflows that we've heard of is, for example, a city has two different departments, a transportation and a water department, for example, and they have different ArcGIS Online organizations. Let's say the water department would benefit from a copy of a survey that the transportation department has. Using this method, you can clone that survey from the transportation department ArcGIS Online organization to the water department ArcGIS Online organization. And you can keep associated web maps, dashboards, any content that's associated with that survey, and you'll have the ability to either include the survey data or start from scratch and not include the survey data. So once the water department obtains that survey or the copy of the survey, they can start creating their own data and submitting their own surveys. Another use case would be if you're in an ArcGIS Enterprise environment and you have multiple organizations, for example, a development, a staging, and production organization. Say you have a survey currently in your development organization that you're working on and grabbing or obtaining some test data, you can then clone that survey from the development organization to your staging organization, continue that process, and then go from the staging to production organization. Again, choosing if you want to keep the test data or if you don't care about the test data, you can then clone. And once the survey is in your production organization, you're starting from scratch. So this Python notebook demonstrates how to clone surveys and associated content from one organization to another. This workflow can be used to clone from ArcGIS Online to ArcGIS Online, ArcGIS Online to ArcGIS Enterprise, ArcGIS Enterprise to ArcGIS Enterprise. The direction of cloning doesn't really matter. You can go from any organization to another. And this notebook will demonstrate two methods of cloning. You can either clone related items that are directly related to the form item, or let's say you have additional content in the folder of your survey. Say you have dashboards or other web applications that are built based on that survey. You can clone everything in the entire folder, and that content won't be included in directly related items to the survey. The foundation of the workflow is the clone items method, which is available in the ArcGIS API for Python. This is the infrastructure that allows us to clone surveys from a source organization to a target organization. And given the different content types, possible ArcGIS Enterprise and ArcGIS Online considerations, security considerations, and item dependencies, the clone items method really aims to produce an exact duplicate of an item that retains all of its functionality in the target organization. And one thing to note is cloning relies on the sharing model to determine if a user can clone an item. The user specified in the source organization will need admin access to the content that will be cloned, and the user specified in the target organization will also need the ability to create content in that organization. And for more information on the clone items method, the ArcGIS API for Python team has a guide as well as the API reference available for review. So now jumping into the notebook, we'll prepare our environment for cloning. So here we'll make two connections. We'll make one to our source environment and one to our target environment. So I'll run that. These are both ArcGIS Enterprise environments. This is a 10.8.1. This first one is a 10.8.1 ArcGIS Enterprise environment, and the second one's a 10.9 ArcGIS Enterprise environment. So in this scenario, I'm using ArcGIS Enterprise, but I could easily change the second one to ArcGIS Online or change this first one to ArcGIS Online. They'll both run the same. So in this first workflow, I have a few surveys that are shared to a group, and I would like to clone them to my 10.9 organization, and I will show that right here. So I have this group, this survey group here. And it contains a number of forms and feature services that I have in this organization. So I would like to clone that to my second organization here, which doesn't have that group or any of that content present in it. So I'll go back. Moving on here, we'll define our survey manager. A survey and a survey manager is an instance of a survey project that contains the item information and properties, as well as provides access to the underlying survey data set. And in this example, 4 surveys are shared to that group. And using the group ID, a connection is made to the group and a list is created of all the form items in that group. So this ID here is the ID of this specific group here. And then we're searching for the forms and returning the results of that. So I'll run that, and we'll see we have 4 surveys shared to that group. So now the code below will start by creating a new group in that target organization. As that group doesn't currently exist, it'll use the same title and tags that's present in the source organization, so that the one in the target organization is an exact copy. Once the surveys are cloned, they'll be shared to this newly created group. And that's what this first line of code up here is doing, is it's creating that group. We then loop through each form item in this source forms list from above that we defined earlier. And we grab the related items. So the survey to service relationship will obtain the feature service that the survey is pointing to, and then the survey to data relationship will return anything that is linked to the survey. So for example, when you publish the form, if you enable the web map when you publish the form, that will be linked to it. If you have any linked content from Survey123 Connect, or if you have any report templates that are linked to the survey, those will all come through using the survey to data relationship here. So then we create a list of all the items that we need to clone. And then we create a folder in the target organization using survey dash and then the title of the survey from our source organization. We go through the clone method and it clones all those items, places it in that newly created folder. And here, this copy data parameter, this is the parameter that will tell the clone method if you want to keep the data or not. Since I'm in ArcGIS Enterprise, I'm assuming that I'm going from a dev to a staging to a production environment. In this scenario, I have some test data in my surface. I'll set copy data to false, as I would like to start from scratch in my 10.9 ArcGIS Enterprise environment. So down here, we'll print and confirm that we don't have any features. This should return 0 because no features will be copied since we set copy data to false, but we'll put that print statement in there just to make sure that it does return 0. Next, we'll loop through each item that was cloned. And if the item type is a form, we go through a little workaround here where we'll download the form item to a temp directory and then immediately re-update it and then remove it from our local temp directory. This is a workaround just because if you're cloning surveys that were created in the web, we've seen an issue where the clone method doesn't actually recreate some backend resources that are needed for the web forms to work. So this is a little workaround to make sure that those web forms do work in the target organization. We then add a few tags and then share the content to the group that was created, and then add some additional, make sure our relationship is created and ensure that a few additional properties are enabled on the form item. So I'll run this and we'll watch this run in real time. So we can see source items. This first survey, we're cloning the form as well as the feature service that it's pointing to. And as we can see, 0 was returned for the result feature count as none of the data was copied over. For the next survey, we're cloning the form as well as the field worker and stakeholder views. So this survey was created in the web specifically. And this first one was created in Survey123 Connect, as we only have the form and the feature service. Again, this one returns 0 as expected. The next one for the hydrant inspection, we're cloning the form, the feature service, and a web map that's actually linked to the survey. Since these are internal ArcGIS Enterprise organizations, I don't have any report templates associated with these surveys, but if I were to have a public-facing ArcGIS Enterprise organization, or if I were to use ArcGIS Online, any report templates that are related to these surveys would also come along. And then finally, for the road report, this was also created in the web. So we have the form, the field worker, and stakeholder views that will be cloned over. And as we can see, they all return back 0 for the feature count. So they're all fresh surveys in my 10.9 ArcGIS Enterprise organization. Now let's check and make sure that those exist in the group that was created in the target organization. And while that's running, I'll actually refresh the groups over here in my 10.9 organization. So now we can see that survey group is now created here. And all of our forms and feature services are present in this group. And as that finishes, we'll see those same 4 forms exist in the target organization in that same group. And now that's a great workflow if you have group shared to if you have surveys shared to a group, or you are moving between a development, staging, and production environment. And that will only include the linked content. But what if you have web maps, dashboards, web apps, other content that aren't directly linked to the survey? You may want those items as well. So this next workflow will go through that process of including everything in the folder that's present for the survey. So again, we're going to use our survey manager, and we'll get this specific item ID from the survey form item. So that's the item ID for that form item. Here, using the properties of that form item, we can obtain the item ID of the folder that survey is stored in. And then next, we'll make a connection to our user account and list all the folders that are present in our user account. And then using list comprehension, we can match which folder is associated with the ID that's associated with our survey. And then we can then list all the contents of that folder. So I'll run this one here. And then same thing, we'll create a folder in the target organization, clone our items. We'll print what's been cloned and how many features were in that survey. And then the same workaround if it's since we have that issue with the web forms, we'll go ahead and download the survey that was cloned, and then update it and then remove it from our local directory. So I'll run that. And while that's running, just a few limitations. Cloning is limited to 1,000 records. So if you are copying the data over and you have more than 1,000 records, you may see an error message from that. And then if you have non-ASCII characters in the service name, you may also see an issue with that. And another limitation that I've noted that I'll need to add to this is if you have non-ASCII characters in your survey form item itself, that survey form item will also fail to clone. So as we can see, all these items were then cloned over to that target organization. We'll now move on to a demo for creating reports using the ArcGIS API for Python. So over here, typically it's common to deploy a webhook as an automated process to create reports and share survey results. Although you may want to automate this process over a specified time frame, for example, the past week, month, or quarter. And this is where the ArcGIS Survey123 module in the ArcGIS API for Python can be used to achieve a similar goal. Running a webhook will create reports immediately as your surveys are submitted, but this process using the Python API, you can set it for a larger time frame. You can set it for that week, month, or quarter. So this notebook demonstrates generating a default report template, identifying report templates that are already associated with the survey, generating a single report, generating multiple reports, and saving them to your organization. By default, the generate report method will download those reports locally on disk. And then finally listing those saved reports for the specific user account. And just another note, the Survey123 report service is an ArcGIS Online premium service, so it does consume half a credit per survey report generated. And that's going to be the same whether you're in the ArcGIS API for Python or in the Survey123 website. So I'll go ahead and I'll start running this one. This is using ArcGIS Online, so I'm just specifying my profile for my ArcGIS Online connection. Next, again, we're specifying a survey manager. That's really going to be the backbone for working with Survey123 surveys in the ArcGIS API for Python. So I'll define my survey manager and get this specific survey using its item ID. We print it and we see it's the water quality inspection survey. First, we'll list if there's any templates associated with this survey. I'll run this and we see we have a web map that's associated with the survey and a report template. Now let's say, for example, we didn't have a report template that was already associated with the survey. We can then use the create report template method here to create that report template. By default, it's going to download it locally on disk. It won't automatically pair it with the survey. It won't automatically link it with the survey. So if this is a workflow, you would then need to go through and upload this to your survey using the Survey123 website. And we'll talk about some enhancements coming to this a little bit later. So now we'll generate a single report, and I'll change this index to 1 since our report template is in the first index of our templates variable up here. And I'll run this. Oh, that's the wrong one. I'll run that one. So the generate report method has a where parameter, and this is where you'll be able to specify if you want a single report or multiple reports. In this example, I'm using object ID is 122. So this will create the report specifically for that one record. But let's say, for example, you wanted it for the past week, you can say where creation date is greater than a specific timestamp or is less than a specific timestamp, for example. And you can change this where parameter to whatever is supported when querying a feature service. So if you were to query the feature service, any where parameter that works there will also work here as well. And as we can see, by default, it downloads the report template locally on my disk. Next, I'll generate multiple reports. And actually, I will switch that because there's a lot of data in there. So if I were to omit the where parameter, it would create reports for every single record in my survey. So I'm going to skip that. I'll only run it with object ID 1 and object ID 2. So this will create 2 reports and save them as a zip file locally on my disk. And that didn't seem to work. Let's try a couple different object IDs. That was interesting. So yeah, if you were to have multiple records returned from that where parameter, it would then download that zip file locally on disk. And we'll run this one. This one's gonna be a lot, but we'll run this one. So this one specifies the report title parameter. The report title parameter doesn't exactly work as expected at the moment. It is needed in order to upload your report to your organization. Oh, that's why. I need to update these, so I'll rerun this one. The report title parameter is required in order to upload the zip file to your organization, although it won't name it as test underscore in this scenario. It should be the current timestamp. Unfortunately, there were some changes on the feature report API on the Survey123 side of things that hasn't been updated in the Python API at the moment. So yeah, here we can see our zip file was downloaded locally on disk, and then I'll rerun this one. And then we'll see when it completes. It'll default to survey name. Yeah, survey name underscore report underscore unique ID. And it'll be a code sample in my ArcGIS Online organization. This might take a little bit. And then finally, using the reports property, you can list the reports that are saved to your ArcGIS organizational account from your current ArcGIS connection. So for example, here this one prints the title for this recent reports list, and it then displays each report down there. And we'll come back to that one. That one will probably take a few minutes or so to process. There's a lot of data in that survey. So the next notebook we'll demonstrate is updating the contents of the media folder for an ArcGIS Survey123 form item. There we go, this one just finished. So here we'll see our code sample in our ArcGIS Online organization. By default, it names it water quality inspection underscore report underscore unique timestamp. Unfortunately, it's not working with the test underscore current timestamp, but we'll discuss that in a little bit as that will be fixed in a future iteration. So now moving on to updating the contents of the media folder for our Survey123 form item. The media folder can contain a lot of different information or a lot of different content. For example, offline base maps, CSV files used in pull data functions, or as choice lists using select one or select multiple from a file. You can include image or audio files for use in various question types. So this notebook automates the task of updating the contents of that media folder for a published survey without having to republish it in Survey123 Connect. This is useful when items in the media folder need to be updated regularly. So for example, if you have a CSV, and that's the example I'll show in this notebook, if you have a CSV and you're using it in select one from file and that CSV is being regularly updated, without using the Python API and without using the notebook, you would need to update the CSV in the media folder in Survey123 Connect and then republish the survey. So for however often that CSV is updated, you would need to do that. Using the Python API and using the notebook, you can automate that process, and this notebook and the Python API will do it for you. There's a handful of variables that are needed in order to run the notebook. If you need a portal URL, so for example, by default, it'll be www.arcgis.com if you're using ArcGIS Online, or if you're using ArcGIS Enterprise, you can specify the portal URL of your ArcGIS Enterprise organization. Your username and password, by default, it's using built-in authentication. But if you are using a web tier authentication or some other form of authentication, the ArcGIS API for Python team has a really good documentation resource on working with different authentication schemes. Next, the item ID of the Survey123 form item will be needed, as well as a list for the updated files. So for example, I have two CSVs here, employees and locations. I want to update those two CSVs. And then as well as a folder directory for where those CSVs are located. So looking in Connect, here's that employee form, and it's just a handful of employee names and locations. So what I'll do is I will actually go into the media folder here and open the employee CSV. And I'll add Zach as a new employee. And then I'll add a new location as well. I'll add Redlands as a new location. So if I update the form in Connect here, we should see that Zach and Redlands will show up for employee and location. Yep, so we have Zach and Redlands for employee and location. But if we were to go to ArcGIS Online or to the Survey123 website, and we were to open up this employee form survey, we'll see in the published survey, we still don't have that Zach or Redlands here. So now let's run the notebook. Again, I'm using a profile, so I'm not actually using the profile or the portal URL, username, and password. But if you were using those variables, you would uncomment this line here and comment this profile line out. So we'll do that. And down here, we just have the path to where the employees and location CSVs are located. I'll advance a couple of code blocks. So here we have the properties of our survey, and we'll use it a little bit later on in the notebook. Here we'll make a connection to our item, and I'll run that. So we're creating a temp directory, and we're downloading the Survey123 form item to our temporary directory, and then we'll extract it. It'll currently download as a zip file, so we'll extract it to an extracted folder. Next, we'll loop through each of those CSVs, so the employees and the locations CSVs were updated to the downloaded media folder. We'll remove the old zip file just to make sure that we don't run into any namespace issues. We'll recreate the zip file just to make sure that that's there. That might be in the wrong spot. Next, we'll update the form item in our ArcGIS Online just to make sure that those updated CSVs are there. And then we'll clean up the temp directory that we created. So now we'll refresh our survey form item. And now we'll see Zach and Redlands are now available as choices in this survey. So this can be run for as many CSVs or as many items in that media folder that you need to regularly update, and this will make sure that all of them are updated. And just one final sneak peek notebook. We've been working on this Migrate Attachments to Main Layer notebook. So for pre-310, the only way to add multiple photos to a survey, or one way to add multiple photos to a survey was to put an image question in a repeat, or just to have multiple image questions in your survey. So this workflow is really meant if you used multiple or an image question in a repeat. We now support the multi-line appearance for image questions. So you may not want to use that repeat anymore, and you just want to use an image question with multi-line appearance directly in your survey. So this workflow would allow you to move your attachments from your repeat layer to your main layer so that you can make that process a lot easier. Again, this one takes a handful of parameters. You need the item ID of the feature service that's associated with the survey, your portal URL. Again, I'm going to use my internal ArcGIS Enterprise organization, username and password, and a keyword. This keyword will be the name of your image question in your Survey123 survey. And this keyword is really important because that's how Survey123 will map what images are associated with what image question. And then next, the run mode. There were two thought processes with this run mode, either keep the attachments or delete the attachments. If you're in ArcGIS Online, you may want to delete the attachments because you would then have double the attachments, which would then double the storage of this service and would consume more credits. So you may want to delete the attachments if that's something that you're conscious about. Or if you're in ArcGIS Enterprise, for example, and credits don't matter to you, you can keep the attachments in both the related layer and the parent layer. So first we'll make our GIS connection using the portal URL, username, and password. We'll obtain the token from our current connection. and we'll make a connection to our item object from our object ID up here. Next, we'll loop through the layers and tables, and we'll ask what layer we would like to use and what table we would like to use. So this will be the layer that we would like to copy the attachments to, and this will be the table that we're obtaining the attachments from. So in this example, I only have one layer and one table, but if you had multiple layers or multiple tables, you would need to choose which one you would like to use. So I'll run this. And while that's running, I will show what the data looks like currently. So here's our parent layer. And as we can see, we don't have any images or attachments enabled on this layer. We just have related layer or our related table. And on our related table, all we have are images or attachments. And these are our the parent layer. So we'll go back to the notebook. And it's asking, we'll enter an ID 0 as that's the index of the layer we want to use. And we'll add index of 0 because that's the index of the table we want to use. And this is using the index from Python. It's not using the index from the REST endpoint. So that may be a little confusing, but as the layers and tables are a little bit different in the Python API, we're using those lists as opposed to the REST endpoint. So now that we know which layer and which table we would like to use, we'll make those connections to the feature layer and the table, and we'll extract the URL from the feature service, and we'll use that a little bit later on in an additional function. And if the feature layer doesn't have attachments already enabled on it, we'll enable attachments for you on that parent layer. So since we have keep attachment set in the run mode, the way that we're going to keep track of what attachments have already been copied over is we're going to add a field to the related table called image processed. And as we're processing them, we're going to set the image processed field to true, so that if this notebook were to be run again in the future, we would only need to run where image processed is set to null or not true. This is a field that won't be in your Survey123 survey, as it wasn't created in the XLS form or anything on the Survey123 side of things. It'll just be on the back end in the feature service. So we'll initialize that function. And then next, this add attachment function is going to be the main function that will do the copying for you. Unfortunately, the ArcGIS API for Python at the moment doesn't support attachment keywords if you were to upload the attachment using the Python API. So we have to actually use the REST endpoint and kind of do a back-end workflow to ensure that those keywords are maintained. So we obtain the URL from the feature service as well as the token so that we can send that post request and add the attachments to the parent layer. We use the current object ID that we're working with so that we can construct our URL here. The attachment path, because we're going to need to download the attachments to a temp directory and then re-upload them. And then finally our keyword. So here we're constructing our URL using the URL that was passed in and the current object ID that we're working with. We'll then obtain what the extension is of the attachment. So if it's a JPEG or PNG, and then ensure that we open it in Python. Next, we'll define our parameters. So we'll have our token, our f equals JSON, and which keyword we would like to use, and then finally send that post request to upload the file to that specific object ID. So then down here, this is the code that will really run the workflow for you. And let me initialize that variable or that function. So here we're defining a temp directory. And if our run mode is keep attachment, which it currently is, we'll search for fields in the feature service. So if the image process field doesn't exist, we'll create it for you using that add field function from above. Otherwise, if it does exist, we'll skip that altogether. We'll then query the table for that image where that image process field is null, indicating that we haven't copied over those attachments from the related table to the parent layer yet. And we're returning only the object IDs. So next we'll loop through each object ID and get a list of the attachments for that specific object ID. And since we're going to be since we need the object ID for the parent layer, we need to kind of reverse engineer the relationship between the parent and the related table. So these few lines of code here will find that parent object ID that's related to the current table object ID we're working in. Next, if there are attachments on that table, we'll go through, we'll download them, and then we'll add that attachment. Later on, we'll add that attachment back to the parent layer, and then we set the image process field to true. So I'll go ahead and I'll run this. Since the image process field doesn't exist, the notebook is currently adding it. And as we can see, it's going through each object ID in the table, saying that it's been successfully uploaded to the parent layer. All right, and then that completed. So we'll go back to our portal, we'll refresh this. And now we can see our parent layer has photos and files, which will have the same number of attachments from our related layer. And then now in our related table, we'll see that all of these images have been processed. So some enhancements coming to the Survey123 module. As you've seen when we went through the generate report notebook, if you're familiar with generating reports in the Survey123 website, you'll note that a lot of stuff that's in the Survey123 website isn't quite in the ArcGIS API for Python. So we've worked to make the generate report method on par with what's currently supported in the Survey123 website. So this includes support for PDF outputs, updating the output file name, which we saw wasn't working previously, so that will be fixed. The ability to specifically upload to your organization, so now you won't need to specify the output file name in order to upload to your organization. Those are now mutually exclusive, so you can set the file name or upload to your organization as you desire. You can specify a web map item ID, which will overwrite the web map that's currently present in your report template, as well as map scale. So both of those parameters will overwrite what's in your report template, as well as the ability to merge files. Outside of generating reports specifically, you'll now be able to check report syntax. So you can upload a report template file in the Python API and check the syntax for that, as well as upload that report template. So then you can use the Python API to associate report templates with surveys, as well as update those report templates. So if you have a report template that's already associated with your survey and you need to make any updates to it, you can now do that using the Python API. You can create sample reports, which will allow you to view how your reports are going to look without being charged any credits. And you'll be able to estimate the cost of credits for running reports. We have a GitHub repo. It's called Survey123 Tools, where we have a handful of notebooks currently. I'll go over there now. So that's where we have our clone surveys, our update media folder, as well as working with reports notebooks that we just looked at previously. We have a few other ones if you're an ArcGIS Enterprise and you're pre-10.8.1 and you're upgrading to 10.8.1 and you want to use your attachments in reports, you'll need to ensure that there's keywords on those attachments. So this is a notebook for those folks in ArcGIS Enterprise who are upgrading their ArcGIS Enterprise organization to 10.8.1 or later, and you would like to have keywords, or you would like to use your images in Survey123 reports. And then we also have a few basic notebooks that take a step back and really take a look at using survey data or working with the survey manager and go through the fundamentals of those two workflows. Yep, this is what we have in the Survey123 Tools repo at the moment, but we are constantly adding more, and we are very open to feedback for what workflows you would like to have automated, or if there's anything missing from these current workflows. And then here we have a handful of resources. We have the specific URL for the Survey123 module in the ArcGIS API for Python, that GitHub link for our Survey123 Tools repo, as well as a couple of developer documentation links. One is for the Survey123 developer documentation, and one is for the Python API developer documentation. And now I'll hand it back over to Amy for Q&A.
Thank you, Zach. We're now going to begin answering the questions submitted during today's presentation. We've received quite a few, and we'll try to get through as many as possible, but whatever we do not get to today, we will address in an Esri community blog post after this webinar. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the questions pane in your attendee control panel. Our first question is there a minimum version of ArcGIS Enterprise needed for cloning surveys from one organization to another?
You shouldn't. No, there shouldn't be a minimum requirement. I haven't seen anything in the Python API documentation, but I can definitely circle back with the folks on the Python API side of the team and confirm that there isn't any limitation to that. I think it's the lowest I've tested in is 10.7, and it's worked on my end. But I can confirm that any supported ArcGIS Enterprise organization will work with the clone method.
Okay, great. That sounds good. Another question, is there a limitation on the attachment size that could be uploaded, especially if there are multiple attachments?
And that's for the that last notebook, that if that's referencing the last notebook that was demoed, if the attachment already exists in the feature service or in the related table, for example, there won't be any limit just because that attachment was already uploaded to your feature service. So it's pretty much just doing the same thing, but just moving it over to a different layer in your service. So yeah, if you were able to upload the attachment the first time, then it should work perfectly fine. That notebook goes attachment by attachment, so it's not going to do multiple attachments at once. It'll just do one at a time, and it just does it iteratively very quickly for each attachment.
All right, great, thank you. Next question, can you clone public surveys?
You cannot, no. The clone method requires you to have admin access to the item. So you'll either need to be the owner or an admin of an organization. So if you have a public survey, you wouldn't be able to clone that if you weren't the owner or an admin in the organization where that survey resides.
All right, next question. When would you create reports through the Python API as opposed to using a webhook?
Yep. So yeah, webhooks would be more so for instant creation of reports if you need them as soon as the survey is submitted or updated, whereas you can use the Python API to create those reports over a specific time frame. For example, quarterly, monthly, weekly.
All right, perfect. And where can I learn more about other Survey123 automation tools?
Yep. So yeah, this third to last or the second to last link is the Survey123 developer documentation website. That's where we'll talk about the JavaScript API, which James will be talking about in the next GeoDev webinar series, as well as the Survey123 report REST API and a few other Survey123 extensibility resources that we have out there, as well as we have Esri community blogs that talk about using these workflows and how to really work with anything from webhooks to using the JavaScript API and then everything in between.
All right. Is it possible to clone surveys which also updates XLSForm data, for example, settings, form title, form ID, submission URL?
Some additional work would need to be done to the for published surveys. The short answer to that is not currently. Especially if it's published, there's some additional resources or additional things that you would need to do if you were updating the XLS form. You would need to republish it, but that's kind of on our future radar for the future, is allowing folks to republish surveys or update published surveys, and specifically the XLS form using the Python API. So once that's implemented in the Python API, yeah, what you can do is, before the clone or after the clone, for example, you can use a Python module called OpenPixel, and that can be used to modify the XLSForm or CSVs or what have you. And then once the Python API supports the ability to republish or overwrite surveys, you can then do that with your updated XLSForm. But at the moment, no, but hopefully in the future that should be a workflow that is possible.
Okay, thanks, Zach. The limit to clone is 1,000 records. Do you have any solution to clone more than 1,000 records?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to my mind would be to download the data as a file geodatabase first, do the clone and not include any records during your clone, and then append the file geodatabase to your feature service in your target organization.
Okay, thank you. Are there plans to support exporting Survey123 items and related content using the export package group content introduced in 10.8.1?
To my knowledge, not at the moment, but let me do some additional research on that, and I can get back to. We can post that in the Azure community blog that gets posted for this webinar.
Yeah, that sounds good. And then our final question that we have is the cloning of the features only possible with hosted features, or can referenced data also be cloned?
So yeah, that gets a little difficult. I reference data, if, for example, if you were to go from ArcGIS Enterprise to ArcGIS Online, I don't believe reference data can be used just because that resource wouldn't be there. I think if we were to go from ArcGIS Enterprise to ArcGIS Enterprise and the same enterprise geodatabase was available in both organizations or was registered to both organizations, that should work. But I'll have to double check and confirm that is a workflow that does work with ArcGIS Enterprise to ArcGIS Enterprise. But in terms of ArcGIS Enterprise to ArcGIS Online, I wouldn't expect a registered feature service to create a hosted feature service in ArcGIS Online.
Okay, great. Actually, we did receive one more question, if that's okay, Zach. Can the Survey123 module be used to automate survey submissions when a mobile device comes from a disconnected environment to a connected environment?
No, it would not. No, it wouldn't be able to, but I'm just trying to think if there's another workflow for that or if there is something that we can do.
Okay. Another question that came in, is there a different workflow when a survey was configured to point to an existing feature service and it doesn't reside on the same folder?
So yeah, if your survey does point to an existing feature service and it's not in the same folder, if you're using the relationship, if you're using the survey to service relationship, there will automatically be a relationship between the form item and that service, no matter where, like if it's in a different folder or in the root folder or where it resides in the organization. So if you are using the relationship, that service will come over just because you are, if you are using that relationship.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Zach. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar, ArcGIS Notebooks, Python, and Survey123. If you have any other questions, please feel free to contact me using my email address in your follow-up email. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate if you would complete that and provide your feedback. We will also be providing a recording of this presentation. It will be available within 7 to 10 business days on the GeoDev webinar landing page where you registered for this webinar. And on behalf of Esri and our presenter, thank you for joining us today and have a great rest of your day.